Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and tonight we are making you the biggest part of this program. The subject, as you'd guess, impeachment, and the phone lines are open as we speak. You see the toll-free number right there, 888-766-2428, also 888-RNN-CHAT. Now we're going to start off with a question that we posed to you. Have we heard enough and seen enough now to impeach President Trump? Then, a little bit later in the program, same phone number, but a different variation of that question. Is there anything that would cause Trump's base to actually support impeachment? We know we live in a polarized country here, but we're going to get into some of the numbers right now and some of the positions and just show you just how divided we are. What would it take for this country to get on the same page? But first, an update when we're talking about impeachment, and also we're going to show you where we have been and also where we are going on impeachment right now in this country and what happened today. Let's start off with a closed-door hearing where U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, had a pretty powerful deposition. Now, he's an important figure and a central player in this, as he has a connection to the EU, Secretary of the EU, Gordon Sondland. They're getting a ton of attention for a lot of comments, especially this one. Taylor sent this to Sondland. As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Now, 5 hours later, after speaking with the president, Sondland replied, Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. Plus, CNN got a hold of Taylor's opening statement today. And I recommend, if you can, read it because it is powerful and it leaves no question where the head was at. In it, he described a call that Mr. Taylor had with Sondland. And I'm going to quote directly here. During that phone call, Ambassador Sondland told me that President Trump had told him that he wants President Zelensky of Ukraine to state publicly that Ukraine will investigate Burisma and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. In fact, Ambassador Sondland said everything was dependent on such an announcement, including security assistance. Burisma, as many of you know, the Ukrainian gas company where, just so happens, Hunter Biden, Joe's son, was a board member. And now we're starting to hear from people who were in the room for Taylor's testimony. Congressman Ted Lieu, he's a Democrat from California, he said it was, quote, incredibly damning to the president. Another congressman, who is remaining anonymous, said it was, quote, a sea change. Now, that is called a quid pro quo. Now, I want to read from you the dictionary definition of that very term so we're all clear when we're throwing around Latin what this means. This, according to our friend Merriam-Webster. Quote, something given or received for something else. Very straightforward. In that term, it got Mick Mulvaney into trouble when he admitted the obvious. The administration was doing just that with the Ukrainians. Quid pro quos for political gain. Here, the acting chief of staff during a news conference last week.
You just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happened as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. And I have news for everybody. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy.
So, a couple hours after that jaw dropper, Mulvaney said, well, he didn't say it, and he certainly didn't mean it. And, of course, it's the media's fault for misconstruing his comments, basically quoting him directly and showing what he said on live TV. Then, Mulvaney goes on what you would think would be a safe space for him, Fox News, this past Sunday, and the damage control, it didn't go too well.
You again said just a few seconds ago that I said there was a quid pro quo. Never use that language because there is not a quid pro quo.
You were asked by Jonathan Karl, you described a quid pro quo and you said that happens all the time.
And reporters will use their language all the time. So my language never said quid pro quo.
Also, Mike Pompeo, he was on the Sunday talk show circuit, and he was asked about Mulvaney's comments, and that led to this cringeworthy exchange with George Stephanopoulos.
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals and secondary things based on what someone else has said. George, you would have never done it when you were the spokesman. I'm not going to do it here today.
Except it's not a hypothetical. We saw the chief of staff, the acting chief of staff.
It is, George. You just said George, you just said if this happened. That is by definition a hypothetical.
The chief of staff said it did.
Georgia, you asked me if this happened. It's a hypothetical. I've told you what I observed.
By the way, that eternal gap in time, that wasn't a problem with your television. That was what felt like a year, but was 3 seconds. Now, Taylor, he is just the latest person involved in the Ukrainian story to appear before Congress. Now, for the past couple of weeks, we've seen a steady stream of current and former administration officials testify that, hey, what the whistleblower said was right. There was a quid pro quo. These weren't from third hand, second hand. Some of these people were first hand. Now, there's even more hearings that are coming. And we're also getting more clarity on where Democrats are heading with their inquiry. Now, this coming from NBC News. Democrat House committee chairs and leaders, they're still debating the need for additional articles or charges that extend beyond the president's dealings with Ukraine. But Pelosi has been adamant that the case against Trump must be targeted and it's got to be easily to communicate in order to build public support. Time will tell how this all plays out, but Pelosi, for her part, has been very consistent about keeping the inquiry in a single lane, Ukraine. So if the House impeaches the president, the case then heads to the Senate. And that is a much heftier lift because Republicans, they've got the majority, as you know, and by rule, 2/3 have to vote to remove the president for office. So that means 67 votes, and that means 20 Republicans would have to vote yes with all 47 Democrats to send Trump packing. Axios reporting that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he's prepping his caucus for a trial to begin as early as Thanksgiving. But he reportedly hasn't discussed that timeline with Pelosi or Schumer, so everything, as they say, is still very fluid. The calendar moving forward is just as uncertain, but one thing, it is crystal clear. Support among the voters is growing in favor of impeachment. Plus, there is a sharp divide among party lines. There's new numbers out from CNN that show 50% of the American public not only support impeachment, but removal from office. Now, bear in mind, other polls we've seen recently have that number even higher, but all polls have one thing in common, a huge spread between the parties. CNN shows 87% of Democrats in this country support impeachment, but only 6% of Republicans favor impeachment as well. And when you listen to how each party talks about the idea of impeachment, it's not a shocker here that the polls looked at the way they do. Let's start off with some sound or some statements from Democrats.
There was basically an unofficial, illegitimate shadow foreign policy being conducted by Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his henchmen, where they were engaged in the shakedown of the Ukrainian government.
The idea that vital military assistance would be withheld for such a patently political reason, for the reason of serving the president's re-election campaign, is a phenomenal breach of the president's duty to defend our national security.
This is so solemn. None of us came to Congress to impeach a president. That's not what we come here to do. It isn't a unifying thing for the country to have to go through this, but we do have to honor our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So that's the Democrats. Now, let's listen to what the Republicans are saying.
You should not bring politics into it, and you should make sure you have a fair process. We've never taken a vote about impeachment inquiry, and the reason why that is so important, every American lends their voice for 2 years to their representative. Right now, one person is having all the power.
In fact, everyone said when you read the transcript, even Democrat chairman, no quid pro quo. Then President Trump and President Zelensky meet and they say, look, no pressure, no linkage, no pushing, no quid pro quo.
The American people should be asking, why does Nancy Pelosi enact a system that provides less due process for President Trump than Republicans provided for President Clinton? What is it about this impeachment of President Trump that is so different that would have Nancy Pelosi go to such extreme measures to keep the evidence secret?
Now, the president, he's continuing to call it all a witch hunt and even worse. I'm going to read you his latest tweet, which is being called a new low even for him. So someday, if a Democrat becomes president, the Republicans win the House, even by a tiny margin, they can impeach the president without due process or fairness or any legal rights. All Republicans must remember what they are witnessing here, a lynching. But we will win. Now, that lynching comment is angering a lot of people for understandable reasons, and African Americans particularly livid. Here's Congresswoman Karen Bass, head of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Whenever his back is against the wall, a racial bomb is what we know of him to throw.
You think this is racist?
I mean, I think it's consistent. Why would you use the term lynching? Why would you say that?
What do you think?
Well, I think because he throws out race, because he knows it's red meat, and he has done that consistently.
And I want to bring in Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent, and language awful here, but we're opening our phone lines tonight, and I know people have already fled the lines. I promise we're going to get through as many as we can, so keep on calling. But what I hopefully did in that windup was we already knew we had two countries. Maybe we didn't know it as much 3 years ago, but by now we certainly have figured that out. And the polling really reflects it. The sound from Capitol Hill reflects it. But we're hearing a lot of comments off camera or from folks who are tied to the city that Republicans are very nervous about this. And if there was an anonymous vote, maybe those 20 votes would be there and maybe even more, but it's not an anonymous vote. We've got an election year next year. A lot of Republicans are up even in the Senate, obviously every House member. So there's a political component. But let's try and debunk some of the noise that complicates this. The president is not being railroaded. It's not a kangaroo court. There's no due process that he's not being afforded. That's not where the process is right now. The trial phase, that's where we'll get into some of these. But right now, they're really in the investigative phase before even an inquiry is announced.
They are, and in past similar moments like this, for example, inquiries into the Obama presidency or inquiries into the Clinton presidency or the Nixon presidency were handled by an outside entity. They're the ones who did the investigation. They're the ones who did the research. That hasn't happened here because the Justice Department won't do any research. So the House is doing these depositions, which a special prosecutor would do in the past, and they're doing them behind closed doors. Republicans on the committee can be in the room. They have been in the room. So comments that they're being excluded are bunk. And they will have a chance to give the president's defense, both when this is debated before the Judiciary Committee and the full House, and if he's impeached, trial before the full Senate. You said many of them are worried. They should be. And I just want to make a few comments about today's testimony from Ambassador Taylor. From what we've read, Ambassador Taylor is today what John Dean was during Watergate. He's the guy who knows where everything was, knows who all the players were, and is spilling the secrets. The only reason why it's not exploding bigger than it is today is because he was spilling those secrets in private. We know that the Trump administration sought word that Ukraine was going to investigate the Bidens.
And if I could, Andrew, the process by what they do, by how they did it today, according to at least Ambassador Taylor, was they created intentionally two different tracks for how these conversations were happening. One intentionally secretive.
Yes, and so that one hand didn't know what the other one was doing. But again, what the Trump administration sought was just word from Ukraine that we're going to investigate. Why is this important? Because let's say he hadn't been caught. Let's say the whistleblower never gave that information to Congress. We'd be finding out about this because of a report that breaks in the New York Times or a report that breaks on CNN that Ukraine is investigating the Bidens. Well, that's detrimental to Joe Biden, and all you need to do is look back at the lessons of Hillary Clinton and her emails in 2016, which, by the way, we just heard this weekend, there was no there, but it was enough to torpedo Hillary Clinton's campaign. Or if they're talking about this 2016 server, that also helps Trump because it makes his election of 2016 look better. They kept it all hidden, these interactions with a foreign government. How many other interactions of a similar nature are there with other foreign governments? He deals with China, Saudi Arabia, Korea, all the time. There could be more of these outreaches that are locked in that vault. We now need to check in on his diplomacy.
Right, and the Democrats seemingly have made a political decision that they're going to try and stay in a lane. And they're not going to take forever to do this. So they're going to stay on Ukraine. But to Andrew's point, just think about some of the other questions, maybe even testimony that might lead to it. We know, this much we know. They knew what they were doing was wrong when they were doing it. Why do I know that? When the conversation happened, I know the president said it was a perfect conversation, but before they even did it, they set up two different tracks. They had pressure being exerted before the phone conversation that was originally canceled and the funding that was held up. They got the message to the Ukrainian president that, hey, You better play ball with this president. And Ambassador Taylor basically echoed it today. It was communicated to the Ukrainians. This guy doesn't do anything unless he's getting something. So they then have the conversation, which is, you give me the 400, you'll get your 400 mil when I get my dirt or when I get my investigation. And by the way, in the testimony today with the ambassador, it was important apparently that the Ukrainian president did TV to echo these things because the president likes television. He wanted to see the guy out on TV talking about the investigation primarily into Biden, okay? 1. 2, the people knew this thing was wrong because they hid the conversations on a private server. Now, we understand there's other conversations on those servers, and that's, Andrew, where this question to our audience comes in. If it's just about Ukraine, I think unless you have partisan blinders on, you can't debate the following. The chief of staff admitted it. There was a quid pro quo. You get the money, you do the investigation. If I don't get that, you're not getting your money, and you can worry about the Russians breathing down your necks. So is that enough for impeachment? Or should the Democrats continue to bring in not just more witnesses at this stage, but even possibly broaden it more? How about getting your hands on the conversations reportedly that there's with Saudis and the president that are also on this hidden server? Or what about the conversations this president had with Putin that apparently are on this server? Do you run the risk of this being too wide, or do you run the risk of this being too narrow?
It's a difficult question, because to make it digestible to the public, you want to keep it narrow, but their misdeeds seem to be so broad that you have to widen it out as new information comes forward. I would recommend a hybrid, actually. Submit the Ukraine impeachment charges and keep working on other things as they come out. And here's why I say that, because the Trump administration has corrupted the State Department and our diplomatic corps by doing this alternate, for his personal benefit, U.S. foreign policy and diplomacy. What else has he corrupted? And I point out that the Attorney General has an investigation going at the Justice Department on the origins of the Mueller report. Would he hesitate to issue indictments or to make some sort? I'm concerned that the Justice Department may be corrupted. I'm concerned that other departments may be corrupted as well. This is a corrupt act that we saw through our State Department and our diplomatic corps for President Trump's personal gain. There is no other way to view it based on the testimony today.
So you heard from Andrew. He's made it very clear. If he got a vote, he's heard enough here to impeach and remove this president, certainly moving on with the process. When we come back, we head right to the phone lines and we get your answers to that question. You see the number on your screen? Your reaction, everyone, straight ahead.